All right, so today going through our shoulder joint and shoulder girdle, as well as our elbow. And so as we work our way through this, we're going to kind of hopefully have a better understanding of how these joints are operating and working together, but also some of the common dysfunctions that are sort of present in the upper body. So one of the distinctions we want to make is we do want to understand sort of the difference between our shoulder girdle and our shoulder joint. A lot of people think of their shoulder joint, they're going to think of that ball and socket joint hanging off that's allowing them to do all this movement right here. And that is accurate. But your shoulder girdle is going to be your scapula working together with your collarbone. And so like that girdle also needs to have proper posture. So we need to have upper back strength in addition to arm strength in order for us to maintain that posture. So as we're looking at it, our structures that we're going to be looking mostly at today are our collarbone, that's your clavicle, your scapula, which is your shoulder blade, your humerus, which is going to be your upper arm, ulna and radius, which are going to be your lower arm, that's your forearm. And then there is the wrist. Just looking at the anatomy here, we do have our carpals making up all the little tiny wrist bones, your metacarpals making up your palm, and your phalanges making up the fingers. So we're seeing that classic, biology structure, the one bone, two bones, lots of bones, and digits arrangement there. So your shoulder girdle, like I said, that is going to be your clavicle and your scapula. The big important thing to remember is that, not only does this hold our arm on, but it is also, very important for maintaining posture because it moves as a unit. So while it holds our arm on, it can also limit our arm's ability to move if it is out of alignment. So we got to make sure that we are maintaining our alignment in one or both of them. Otherwise, none of them are going to move properly. Your shoulder joint is that humerus interacting with the scapula. It doesn't have to interact with the collarbone directly or anything like that, but it does have to interact with the scapula. So when you look at the sort of the girdle here, right, you can see there's your sternum attached to your collarbone, and then that is attached to this very weird looking bone, which is your scapula, which has all these very interesting hooks and processes on it that we're going to look at today. But you can actually see right here, this is kind of fun little factoid for you. The clavicle, which is the collarbone right here, its articulation with the sternum, which is this little hook right here, is the only bone-on-bone contact that holds your entire arm on. So this little joint right here, where your collarbone comes across and just grabs onto the sternum here, is the only thing that's bone on bone that holds your entire arms onto your body, which is kind of wild, and obviously, because we can do like pull-ups and we can do all these crazy swinging actions and stuff, but there's not a lot of bone on bone contact there. A lot of it is actually held together with soft tissue, which is why a lot of your scapula is what's considered a false joint. And it's where it doesn't have bone on bone contact, it has bone on muscle contact and things like that. And that's why we have so much muscle in our upper back, sort of covering this whole area. Then we've got our shoulder joint. Like I said, that's where your scapula here, the actual shoulder blade, is going to interact with the humerus. And so that is a ball and socket joint. We're seeing a lot of frontal pictures here, but you can see we've got the blade and it's got this little hook right here. And then from behind, see how you can see this little dark area here, kind of shades out. There's a little hook that kind of reaches out from behind and kind of hooks around like that. That whole area creates this little cavity called your glenoid cavity. And so that's where this ball and socket joint actually interacts and sits. You can see that glenoid cavity right here. So there's the glenoid process is what it's sometimes called. So this is your most mobile joint in your entire body, or at least it's supposed to be. And it can perform every type of movement. It can go sagittal, it can go with flexion and extension, it can go frontal with abduction and adduction, it can go transverse with external rotation and internal rotation. It can do circumduction, which is sort of a combination of all of that happening simultaneously. But while that is great, I've said this before, with increased mobility often comes decreased stability. So we do often see a lot of dislocations and subplexions in our shoulder joint. And we also see a lot of problems like shoulder impingement and things like that. And then lastly, we've got our elbow joint. This is the articulation between your elbow and the radio-ulnar joint. Technically, your elbow is two separate joints. You can see the elbow joint proper, which is your ulna, your sort of the bladey part of your forearm here, interacting with the humerus. And so that's the actual elbow joint proper. But then there is also a joint right here where your radius is interacting with the ulna itself, and it can do sort of a little pivoting action, which allows us to pronate and supinate. So it's the humerus and the ulna, and the radius and the ulna. Those are the two joints that we're going to see at the elbow. Then you've got all kinds of little tiny joints at the wrist, but like I said, we're not going to spend too much time on the wrist just because it's not relevant to NASM's information. And honestly, if there's a wrist problem, chances are they're more likely going to a physical therapist. But you can see all of these individual joints. There's actually another radio-ulnar joint down here. This is the more distal version. But you can see there's just going to be a lot of little tiny itty bitty joint structures there, and lots of sliding that has to happen in those little cuboid bones. So shoulder pain, taking a look at our first injury here, just general shoulder pain, right? Any and all pain in that glenohumeral joint. So we're not talking so much about scapular pain. We're talking about like actual shoulder joint pain where your humerus is interacting. This affects about 1 in 5 people in general, the most common of which is going to be what's known as shoulder impingement syndrome, or just shoulder impingement. This is probably going to be the most common. Costs about $39 billion a year, which is a crazy high amount of money. And then sometimes we'll see like traumatic, like actual like dislocations and stuff. That's a lot less common, but definitely obviously can occur. We also know that rotator cuff problems are going to be very common as well. But looking at shoulder impingement syndrome, what we're really seeing here, whenever you hear the word impingement, you guys can honestly just think impingement, like the soft tissues are being impinged. Right. And so ideally this muscle right here, which we're going to see today, it's called your supraspinatus. It stands for superior of the spine, which sounds kind of weird. You're like, what? That's not above my spine. Spine's to the left. Yeah, it would be. But there's actually a ridge on your scapula we're going to see today called the spine of the scapula. And so this is above the spine of the scapula. It's got a little tendon that reaches all the way down, and it helps with abduction of the arm. But you can see there's all of this other tissue there, right? Like this is the other hook in your scapula there. So this muscle is very interesting because it has to live on top of one part of the scapula and then run below a ridge of the other. And then you've got your humerus interacting there as well. If any of these structures get super overactive and the muscle can't move properly, it will actually get pinched between these little structures right here. And so that pinching or rubbing sensation causes aches and pains, and that is the clicking that you'll sometimes feel in your shoulders. Now, if you got a little bit of a click in your shoulder and it doesn't cause you any pain or irritation, it's not really that big a deal, but it can be an early warning sign that you've got some postural distortions taking place in the shoulder, and that you need to strengthen muscles like your rotator cuff and your upper back in order to draw you back into alignment. I will say, for those of you who do feel that pinching when you do like a lateral raise, I always take note of this whenever I'm working out. I got a little bit of pinch yesterday, not a pinch, but I definitely felt like a click yesterday while I was doing like my lateral raises. And so sure enough, I just rolled my shoulders back, fixed my posture, and then it immediately just instantly disappeared. So always really important to maintain that good posture and proper alignment so that we don't get that clicking. Now, like I said, is it the end of the world if you feel like a little bit of a click? Not really. If it aches, then that's a sign that you're dealing with impingement. And it's but if it does just sort of click, it's kind of, in my opinion, it's like an early warning sign. It's not the end of the world. So we do know that we're going to see that. We're going to see general, let's see here. So there's our shoulder impingement, right? Pain by caused from connective tissue sort of rubbing in between like the clavicle and the shoulder itself, or well, not the shoulder, but the humerus itself, right? Then we're also going to see like rotator cuff injuries. Rotator cuff injuries are very, very, very common in the shoulder. I'd say about about 75 to 80% of all shoulder injuries are rotator cuff. So while shoulder impingement is sort of the most common that you'll see people deal with like on a regular basis, I'd say most people will have some type of rotator cuff injury throughout their life, like at some point. It's kind of like low back pain, right? Like low back pain is something that like 80% of people deal with at some point. It's not quite that high with rotator cuff injuries, but we definitely see a lot of this. So when I say that, what I'm talking about is like some type of muscle strain or a rupture or a tendonitis, tendinopathy, whatever you want to call it, that we'll see in the rotator cuff there. So what muscles are the rotator cuffs? Well, these are the muscles that cause that internal external rotation of the shoulder. And so we definitely want to keep that nice and healthy. That was like part of my day yesterday. It was like some lateral raises and then into some external rotations afterwards. Then occasionally we will see like subflexions or dislocations. These are less common, thank goodness, because it's just horrifying. But this is where the humerus literally becomes disconnected from the cavity and it doesn't fit there anymore. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but you'll sometimes need surgery in order to fix this kind of thing. But a dislocation is where this joint has actually popped out of alignment there. It's usually from some type of traumatic event. It's not like this just happens randomly or anything, but oftentimes someone will fall or get hit or like land on something. And so it will sort of cause this, traumatic dislocation. And then that causes hypermobility problems in the future, unfortunately. So a lot of times, it's a lot of strengthening to get back down that road. We will also see elbow pain. There's a couple different versions of this. There's either lateral elbow pain or there is medial elbow pain. Both of these are called epicondylitis. And it's because there is a little condyle here on the outside of your elbow, and you can actually feel that. If you rub on the outside, you can feel that little knob right here, and then on the inside, you can feel a little knob right there. And so those are your little epicondyles, right? And so what can happen is you can end up with tennis elbow, which is inflammation of that lateral epicondyle. If you ever get like, just an ache or a pain on the outside of your elbow, this is oftentimes, my dad's a furniture mover, and so like a lot of furniture movers will get this because it often is associated with like heavy gripping while lifting. And so you see that in tennis all the time because they're gripping that racket like crazy while they're swinging around. So they get like a rubbing sensation here from. All right, sorry about that, guys.
What happened? You got disconnected?
Yeah, I had a hiccup. All right, everybody back with me? We're missing Arlene, I think.
You need new internet.
She said she's gonna log off and back on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, man. You know what's funny, Chris, about that? They literally just mailed us like a new modem and a new router, and I installed it over the weekend. And they were like, it's way faster. And I was like, great. And I was waiting for this to happen in one of these days. All right, let's get back in there. When did you lose me, guys? Or when did I lose you guys? Do we make it to golfer's elbow and tennis elbow?
Right here in tennis elbow.
Okay. So we didn't. So that's not too bad.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Google Fiber. That's what we need. And Google Fiber in LA. All right. So tennis elbow, like I said, that's going to be inflammation out here associated with like heavy gripping and then lots of swinging of the arm. That one's not. Yeah, my internet's unstable. We'll also sometimes see golfer's elbow. This one's often associated with pronation and supination. So you'll see this one rubbing on the inside. So golfers who are doing that like big swing, and a lot of times they'll kind of supinate while they're swinging. If you've ever swung like a golf club as you're taking it through, you'll do that sort of scooping action at the bottom. That will often cause sort of a rubbing sensation here. Both these are actually pretty easy to fix. Like a lot of times, honestly, just like a little bit of massage back here can have a really positive benefit, or a little bit of massage in here can have a really positive benefit. In both those examples, I was going against the grain. Don't go against the grain when you're massaging. Go with the grain. But it's a better example for on camera, I guess. So those are the elbow pains. Now, just really quick, I do want to mention one that is not here in your notes. We'll sometimes also see like carpal tunnel syndrome. This is sort of a wrist injury. Carpal tunnel is pretty fascinating because it's not actually a like an injury in the sense of like it's not like a muscle rubbing on a bone. It's not anything like that. In this case, it is actually muscle or a tendon, more likely, increasing the pressure in this little tube that runs down your wrist. So there's supposed to be this little empty tube here, and there's all this fascia in your palm, and this little connective tissue band right here can actually rub on what is called your median nerve. And that nerve is what runs down and controls the rest of your hand. So again, peripheral nervous system travels down and branches and branches and branches. If you start like rubbing that, it can cause pain and irritation. So carpal tunnel syndrome, in a lot of ways, is very similar to piriformis syndrome, like we saw yesterday. It's a muscle, or in this case, a tendon, touching a nerve, causing like inflammation. Here's my fun favorite fact about carpal tunnel syndrome. This is a weird little fact, but there's a lot of reasons you should not take hormones, testosterone, or things like that, right? There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't take steroids. And one of those common hormones that people will take that's not necessarily a steroid, because it's not like this isn't dealing with like sex hormones, but you should not really take human growth hormone, HGH, because human growth hormone causes the growth of human tissue. And one of the very odd side effects of taking HGH is actually carpal tunnel syndrome. And it's because this fascia actually thickens in response to just all human stuff growing a little bit larger. And so it could actually cause a cramping in this little tube here, in this little canal. And so it pinches on the nerve and causes irritation. Oh, she's having trouble getting back in here. I hit admit, but she didn't come in. So that's carpal tunnel syndrome. That's a kind of a fascinating one. And if that, that's a very weird side effect. There's much worse side effects associated with human growth hormone. But if it can grow the fascia on your palm, to me, that's a very good warning sign that it's going to grow organs and other things that you also don't really want to grow. So that's kind of a fascinating one, in my opinion. So one more time, there she is. One more time, let's take a look at these bones here so we can understand how our anatomy sort of moves around. What's up, Arlene? What's up, Arlene?
Okay, sorry.
No problem. So looking at the bones of your shoulder, just so that we understand the difference between the shoulder girdle and shoulder joint again. So we're going to see, this is called your sternum. This technically the very top of it is your known as your manubrium. It looks like this little Superman shield right here at the very top of your sternum there. But this entire breastbone here, we usually just call it the sternum. It's a little bit easier to remember. And then you'll notice it's got this little ligament right here that's attaching it to your clavicle, because that's called your SC joint, or your sternoclavicular joint. And then that clavicle or collarbone runs across here, and then it's attached to the scapula. So your scapula is a very weird looking bone, you can actually see if we hook around the backside. Do I got a picture of the backside? Really? God dang it, internet. Or not internet, god dang it, PowerPoint. let me pull up a picture here. Scapula. There we go. So here's a picture of the, actually, there's a picture of all three. So there's a picture of the lateral side, the front side, and the back side. So you can actually see, here's the posterior view. Look at this little ridge. That's the spine of the scapula, right? And it runs across and it hooks around the front of itself. So there, from the back side, you can actually see, there it is hooking, right? Or you can see it like coming up and around like this. So that little hook, that right there at the very end, we call that your acromion or your acromion process. And so that's this little hook right here. So your acromion process is attached to your clavicle, and that's what's holding your shoulder girdle on. That is known as the acromioclavicular joint, which is very hard to say. So we call that the AC joint. So you've got your sternum and clavicle, and you've got your acromion in your clavicle, and that's what's attaching your shoulder girdle onto the rest of your body. You do also have your scapulothoracic joint, which is not necessarily an actual joint, but that is just where the scapula is sort of interacting with like the thoracic portion of your spine. So like you can see here, there's not actually any bone-on-bone contact. Like your scapula is not touching each of these individual ribs. There's sort of a gap there, right? That's your scapulothoracic joint. And so the area between here and the rest of your rib cage, we call that the scapulothoracic. It's a false joint. It's just soft tissue. You know, it's just muscle. So then we've got the shoulder joint itself, and that is where this ball and socket joint is interacting with that glenoid cavity. This is that glenoid cavity. Again, this little gaping, this little ball-shaped socket there. And so there's our ball and socket joint in the shoulder, right? A lot of contact there, but also a lot of mobility. Then if we're looking at our elbow, you can see, again, we've got our humerus coming down. And this looks very similar to the arrangement we saw in like our femur and like our tibia and fibula, right? One bone and then two bones, right? So very similar to that. The only difference here is that if we look at it from the other side, you'll actually see that that ulna hooks around to create a lot more contact. And that's why there's much less range of motion in your forearm when compared with like the range of motion at your knee in terms of like how much movement that can make. And so we do see that sort of like hook like this. So the humerus comes down and there's your ulna. And then there's also the radioulnar joint, which is where the ulna is interacting with your radius. So radioulnar there. So that is, oh, it's doing the yellow text thing. But that is the radioulnar joint. There's a proximal one near the top and a distal one at the bottom. At the wrist, you've got all of your carpals, you know, lots of joints here. Each of these is its own individual joint. You can dislocate those, you can fracture those. You know, when I was a kid, I fell off a slide on my parents' anniversary and completely fractured like a whole bunch of the bones in my wrist here, and then chipped a little bit off this off the ulna there. But what's kind of fun about this, if you do look at the difference between your radius and ulna, it's kind of fun. You can see that the ulna is really large up top, and then the radius is really large at the bottom. So that's not a big picture. So you can kind of see that here, right? There's your ulna where it is interacting with the elbow. Radius is just this little like spinny bit at the top, and then that completely flips on the other side. You can see much more surface area at the radius and much less surface area at the ulna. So again, that allows pronation and supination to occur. And so this is happening inside your forearm every time you bend your wrist. Your bones are sort of twisting across one another like this to create that pronation supination action. So that's kind of fun. Every time you go like that, your bones are twisting over one another, which I think is kind of a weird thing to actually visualize. And I've been teaching this for a long time at this point, but I still think it's kind of weird, you know? So there's your I like it's doing thumbs up. It's like, this is Caesar's arm actually that we're seeing a GIF of. He's voting. So yeah. really quickly, not that we don't have a lot to get through today, but you want to know another weird fun fact? Do you guys remember the movie Gladiator and how he was like, he was either like, keep him alive or kill him? Apparently, that is a real thing that used to happen back in Rome back in the day, but it is actually reversed in the movie. They knew audiences would be very confused if they did it the right way, but apparently Caesar would actually say thumbs down, which meant don't kill them, or thumbs up, which meant like, yeah, murder them. So it is actually backwards in the movie. And I learned that like 3 days ago. So supination, actually, sorry, supination, pronation. All right. Let's get into our muscles here. So biggest muscle we're going to see today in terms of overall size is going to be our latissimus dorsi, or much more commonly referred to as your lats. This is a muscle that loves to get overactive. This freaking muscle just loves to get tight. So jobs of this muscle. And here's the thing. The reason why is because it has multiple jobs. The more jobs a muscle has, the more likely it is to get overactive because it thinks it has to do everything, like as we're looking at this one is in charge of shoulder extension. So it is in charge of pulling the arms back like this. It's in charge of shoulder adduction. So it's in charge of pulling the arms like this. And it's in charge of shoulder internal rotation. So if you actually place your hand under your lat and rotate in like this, you just perform a little bit of rotation, you actually feel your lat fire just under the arm there. You actually feel a little bit of that squeezing action. But you'll definitely feel it if you squeeze down here. You'll definitely feel it if you squeeze back here. So the difference between like a chin up, right, which is shoulder extension, is very much a lat exercise. But we also have pull-ups, which is an adduction exercise. Both of those are lat exercises. So I'll sometimes hear people say, oh, pull-ups work your lats more, whereas like chin-ups work your biceps more. And it's like, that is not necessarily untrue, but your lats work during both of those movements, right? And your lat is very much the prime mover. It's doing most of the work. Even during a chin-up, your lats are still doing most of the work. Even during like a rowing action, right? That's still very much shoulder extension. That's very much your lats. So if there's an upper back exercise that you are doing, it probably involves your lats. The only difference would be, something like this. This is horizontal abduction, right? Because I'm horizontal and I'm moving away from my midline, right? Not a very much lat activation there. We don't really see a lot of lat activation. In that case, it's going to be more like my rhomboids and things like that. But again, this muscle is so commonly overactive. Like how often do we see internal shoulder rotation, right? When we look at somebody who has altered posture, yeah, that's a lot. Rounded shoulders. Let's take a look at what shoulder rounding actually means, right? When we're looking at this, there's a couple, there we go. We use Jeremy here. He can be the model for the day. When we look at shoulder rounding, right, what's happening here, right? There is a little bit of horizontal adduction for sure, right? Horizontal adduction is the actual, like, that would be me pulling this way. So if I leave my arms here, yes, we do see, this come towards the front, right? And that causes the rounding. But we also see a little bit of like thoracic rounding, right? We see a little bit of that, and then the head comes forward as well. But then we also see, this is shoulder internal rotation. So if I just sit here, with sort of like if I've got like a sort of a good posture situation, and then I just take my arms and I roll them around to the front, and I just do a little bit of internal shoulder rotation, you can see instantly that rounds my shoulders forward, right? And it's kind of hard to see when you're sitting, but that internal shoulder rotation literally brings it in. So when we see shoulder rounding, right, and we look at like what we call upper crossed syndrome, there's my table. There it is. Load. Oh, it's one of those. So we see that upper cross syndrome, which we know is sort of like shoulder rounding, right? We know that there's tight muscles back here and over here, right? That is sort of causing that. I'm trying to find. Let's go to NASM's website. They'll have it there. Oh, they changed up their colors a little bit. Downloads and assessment forms. Static and dynamic posture assessment. So this is the assessment cheat sheet that's in your book. If we look at upper cross syndrome, right? We're going to see some overactivity in muscles like your upper trapezius, your levator scapula, and your sternocleidomastoid. Those are all neck muscles that sort of bring your head forward. We're also going to see our pectoralis major, which is in charge of horizontal adduction, and our pectoralis minor, which is also in charge of a little bit of that rotation. So that's where we see a lot of that tightness. And then I would definitely, if it were me, add the latissimus dorsi onto this list as well in overactive, because if we see a client whose arms fall forward, they have a hard time, lifting their arms up, right? They can't go to here. They can only get to here. We definitely know that the lats are going to be involved there, right? Our latissimus dorsi is overactive because it's in charge of pulling this way and this way, right? It comes down in both directions. So for me, I would definitely add the lats onto that list as well. So those are, this is a very commonly tight muscle. It's also a muscle that we all want to know how to work. This is a great muscle to strengthen. So, we don't want dysfunction to be here. We want to, keep it very mobile, but also very strong. So if we want to stretch it out, we need to know how to do a little bit of shoulder flexion. So that's going to be going in this direction, right? And we also need to do a little bit of shoulder abduction. So there's a couple different lat stretches that you'll see out there. Sometimes you'll see the sort of combo tricep lat stretch, right? Now this is very much stretching out my tricep right under here. But I've also pulled it into abduction. And because my lat does adduction, that's a very good stretch. So I can go here, and then I can make it even more intense by just leaning over slightly. And I'll feel that stretch right under the armpit there. Alternatively, I could also do a little bit of shoulder flexion as well, right? I could go, like like this, and then I could press this here, and then kind of lean back into that. And so because this is shoulder, extreme shoulder flexion, that is going to do a good job there as well. And then you'll notice I did it with my thumb up the entire time. I like to do that because, remember, it is also in charge of internal rotation. So by going thumb up, I'm in external rotation, right? So that's a really big one. You'll sometimes see people do like lat stretches, and I always tell them like thumbs up, So that's a really, really good one there. And again, we're going to strengthen that through things like pull-ups or chin-ups, anything where we are pulling our lats back. Even bent over rows with like a reverse grip is a really good lat stretch or lat strengthening exercise. So there's our big upper back muscle that kind of covers everything. Let's take a look next at our shoulder musculature here. So we're going to start with kind of an interesting one. We're going to start with the serratus anterior. This is a very interesting muscle. You can actually see it's kind of wrapping around the entire rib cage there. So the serratus anterior, let's pull up another picture of this. Ken Hub's pictures are so freaking good. So this is kind of an interesting muscle, right? It kind of lives underneath the scapula, but it attaches to the scapula, in the backside there. And then it pulls it towards the front side. So this is directly in charge of shoulder protraction, right? Remember, horizontal adduction is my humerus moving this way. But if I just take my scapula and I just round it around my front, that is my serratus anterior. Now, here's what's very confusing for new people. The serratus anterior, I just said we had excessive shoulder protraction, right? With our altered rounded posture, right? When we see this, it's like, oof, that's a lot of shoulder rounding. There's a lot of protraction that's happening there. But here's the thing. If you look at your underactive muscles list, you will actually find the serratus anterior on that list. And that seems very, very odd, right? You wouldn't think that this muscle that rounds the shoulders would be a muscle that we want to strengthen. But here's why that actually makes sense. And it doesn't make sense until you look way down here and get to the pectoralis minor. But there are two main muscles that are going to do shoulder protraction. One of them is the serratus anterior, which pulls like this. And the other one is your pec minor. So I'm going to just take a look at the pec minor here. There's the serratus anterior. By the way, I always pull up a picture. It's so funny. Manny Pacquiao, just friggin' super well defined serratus anterior. And then pectoralis minor. So here's the pec minor. So it is attached onto the front of the rib cage. So it is on the front of the rib cage and it grabs the scapula here, right? It grabs it at what's called your coracoid process. Okay, it lives, there's your acromion process, right? So it'll hook on the front. That's your coracoid process. So it grabs the front of the scapula there. This one grabs the bottom of the scapula. And so they're both in charge of like protraction, but your pec minor up here, because it's grabbing the top, you got to remember it's kind of shaped like this, right? It's kind of stacked upright. So if you grab from the top, it tilts it down, right? If I grab from the bottom, it tilts it up. Or more accurately, if I grab just kind of the whole thing, it kind of brings it forward. So when we see shoulder rounding, we don't just see protraction, we see this kind of protraction where my scapula tilts forward. So in a weird way, this is actually a muscle that we want to strengthen because it would pull from the bottom. If you got a tilting forward, what can you do to level it out? You pull from the bottom and that swings it back upright. So really the bad guy muscle here, the really tight muscle that's causing us a lot of problems is our pectoralis minor. Lives underneath our pec major, by the way, your main chest muscle. So this is definitely, we need to get this thing loosened up, and I'll talk about how to do that in just a moment. Whereas this one, we actually want to strengthen. I know it seems really weird to strengthen a protractor muscle when you have excessive protraction, but this is an example of that synergistic dominance, where a helper muscle, the pec minor, is taking over for an inhibited prime mover, the serratus anterior. So the only job this muscle has, by the way, is to accelerate scapular protraction. So how do we strengthen it? Well, the reason Manny Pacquiao is so good at it actually is because actually pushing motions like this, throwing punches, is actually a very good way to strengthen it. But you can also do exaggerated movements like this. This is a really good one. Where you take a foam roller and you roll the arms up the wall. You're actually pressing with that protractor muscle. That is a really good one. And it has the added benefit of going up, which means that you are going to have to round your shoulders back. And then you can only use the serratus rather than using your pec minor. But you can also do what is called a push-up plus. Actually, there it is. It's kind of a weird postured push-up with this upper back rounding that doesn't seem proper, but that's actually him pushing into exaggerated protraction there. It's actually a very good serratus anterior exercise. So you would actually go from a neutral push-up position in, well, that's actually not a great demo. You would go, let's see here. I think NASM's got one on their stuff. Push up plus.
Going out.
So it looks like this. Oh God, that's creepy. So there's a plank where she's going into a push-up plus. So she's just doing a little bit of like scapular retraction, and then she pushes into scapular protraction using those serratus muscles. And you can also do that in a push-up position. Protraction, retraction. So that's a very good one. you're going to see that muscle show up as an underactive muscle that you're going to want to strengthen. So you're going to want to know how to do those exercises. Again, clients with shoulder dysfunction, this is a really big one that we want to strengthen. Then we got our rhomboids, both your major and your minor. There are actually two sets of fibers here, but they both kind of do the same thing. The major fibers is the big one. The minor fibers, these little tiny ones up here at the top of it. But their job is scapular retraction. So this is a direct antagonist of the serratus anterior, right? Your rhomboids grab your scapula and they pull the scapula together. So they are in charge of pulling those shoulder blades back, right? And then they also do a little bit of downward rotation. They are pulling that scapula. So that's actually a really good one. If we look at like scapular downward rotation, what we are going to see is where you are basically pulling from the bottom of the scapula down like this. And so it causes your scapula to swing. That's the downward rotation we want. Love that, right? We also want to have upward rotation, but generally we have a little bit too much of it. So that is a muscle that we are certainly going to sort of work on there. Your rhomboids is a big one. This is where, honestly, guys, if you're doing like a seated row, roll your shoulders down and back, give it that row so you can retract, and then leave it there. Don't come all the way back around here. Keep it retracted the entire time, you know? And if you do your rows like that, they're going to be much more effective. You're going to activate those rhomboids a lot better because you're just giving them dedicated effort. So concentrically, it shortens during scapular retraction and then does a little bit of downward rotation there as well. And then we got our three trapezius muscles. So here is your lower trapezius. It's the low one. Here's your middle trapezius in the middle, and there's your upper trapezius up top there, right? So this whole section here is your trapezius, makes a trapezoid, by the way. And so there's the lower fibers, middle fibers, upper fibers. Now, they all work together in some ways, and then they are antagonists in other ways. So the lower trapezius concentrically accelerates scapular depression. So this muscle's main job is to depress your scapula. So here's the thing, we don't have a lot. If I'm sitting here with a neutral posture, I don't have a lot of scapular depression to do. But if I take my scapula up like this is scapular elevation. This is scapular depression, elevation, depression. So those are the different parts of my traps that are doing that, right? The upper trapezius does scapular elevation, right? It's in charge of this. And that's why you see people doing shrugs in the gym. They're trying to build up their upper trapezius muscles. However, I gotta tell you, I'm not a big fan of doing trap exercises. You know, this is a muscle that we also, if I just sit here on my computer long enough, right, I'm in scapular elevation. I need to drop my freaking shoulders down. We sit on our phones, we do this kind of thing all day. We're stressed out while we're driving, right? Arlene, you're driving right now. Wouldn't be surprised if you're, you know.
Yeah, I'm still driving.
I'll bet you those upper traps.
But not too much. I'm a pretty relaxed driver.
That's a good way to be. So these are both trapezius muscles, but one of them is sort of a tight muscle most commonly, and one of them is a weak muscle most commonly. Again, if we look at that idea of what we call upper crossed syndrome, right? Remember how we talked about lower cross syndrome? That's the anterior pelvic tilt, right? And we call it a cross syndrome because it's like tight muscles in the back to tight muscles in the front, weak muscles in the front to weak muscles in the back, and it makes an X. Well, the same thing's happening in upper cross syndrome. We are seeing tight muscles up top in the back and tight muscles down below in the front, and weak muscles up high in the front and weak muscles down below in the back. So it makes the X, tight to tight, weak to weak, right? So that is that altered sort of rounded posture, forward head stuff that we tend to see, right? The upper trapezius right here is one of those tight muscles because it concentrically accelerates scapular elevation. It does do a little bit of cervical extension, which we should give it credit for. It does a little bit of this, which is something we want a little bit more of. And it also does lateral flexion, so a little bit of this. In fact, a lot of this, actually. That's one of the main things it does. If my left one contracts, my right one's supposed to relax, right? This is how we're going to stretch this muscle, by the way. And then we've got cervical rotation. There's a little bit of this as well. So it rotates this way. So again, it's a muscle that has a lot of jobs. The more jobs something has, the more likely it is to be overactive. So this muscle is working against the lower trapezius. So a lot of times we need to know how to stretch the upper trapezius and strengthen the lower trapezius. So how do we do that? Well, let's start with stretching the upper Oh, and then I should mention it because we've been here long enough. We've got our middle trapezius in the middle between the two, and it does scapular retraction. So it actually works with the rhomboids. In fact, this is actually more what you see. You know, a lot of times, like if I Google rhomboids, you know, people will often like, you know, they'll be like, look, you get really, you know, that's a really well-defined upper back. And so you got good rhomboids. You're not really seeing the rhomboids. You're seeing the middle trapezius. Actually, there's a good picture, right? You can kind of see those fibers there between shoulders. So there's the upper traps, there's the lower traps, and there's the middle trapezius. Rhomboids would be underneath that. There's a picture of all the layers just so you guys can see it, right? And then the whole thing is also just, you know, covered by your lats on top of that, you know. A lot of layers in the upper back. It's like onions and ogres. So if we're looking at this, right, a lot of times when we see somebody who has excessive shoulder elevation, which we are definitely going to see a lot of, or when we see somebody with arms falling forward, which is often caused by that, we need to know how to stretch out the upper traps, and we need to know how to strengthen the middle/lower trapezius. Let's go to NASM's overhead solutions table again. And take a look at our list. So, client whose arms fall forward, we need to look at the probable overactive. That's the latissimus dorsi, pec major, pec minor. And then we need to see strengthening in the middle/lower trapezius and rhomboids and rotator cuff. Then we go down here and we look at like shoulders elevating. There's the upper trapezius again. What do we need to strengthen? The middle and lower trapezius. So again, middle traps, lower traps show up on our need to strengthen list a lot. Lats, pecs, and upper traps show up on our need to stretch list a lot. So how do we stretch our upper trapezius? It's actually not that complicated. It is as simple as this. You're literally just going to drop your ear over to one side, arm comes up, and you're just going to kind of gently relax there. If you want to take this arm and actually reach down with it and sort of depress the shoulder simultaneously, that gives you an even deeper stretch. Spend, you know, 30 seconds doing this on one side, do 30 seconds on the other. Do that before you go to bed, guys. You'll wake up feeling like $1 million. It's a really, really good one. Then we need to know how to strengthen the lower traps and middle traps. Well, the middle traps are in charge of scapular retraction. So again, any rowing action where you're learning how to pull those shoulders back is going to be pretty good for that. And then in terms of like lower trapezius, right, that scapular depression, you just want to make sure you are keeping your shoulder blades rolled down and back. And as long as you are doing that during your rows, it is going to have a very big positive benefit on those lower traps. You can also do some lower trap specific exercises. One of my favorites is what's called a scapular pull-up. And so scapular looks like this. It is actually just a very small range of motion pull-up here. And so you big picture. You relax into scapular elevation, and then you just contract those lower traps to elevate you. So you go from here at scapular elevation, and you just depress down and then relax back up. And that's a really good low trap activator as well. Also, one of the best ones is going to be what's known as combo number 1. Combo number 1 is much more commonly referred to as the YTA, and it is where you actually go into a Y. So your scapula has to stabilize through that entire range of motion. You go into a T, that is direct work for your middle trapezius, and then you go into an A, which is direct work for your middle and lower trapezius. So the Y is actually a little bit more, I mean, honestly, that's kind of a deltoid thing. But your scapula has to stabilize. And then you get the T, which is direct work, and the A, which is direct work. So YTA's really, really, really great exercise. There's also combo number 2. That's ball combo number 1 because she's on a ball. But combo number 2 is another really good one. That's going to be a row, so middle trapezius. Then she does external rotation. That's going to be her rotator cuff. We haven't gotten to that yet. And then she's going to press overhead. And again, the entire scapula has to stabilize there. Pulls it back down, unrotates, and unrows. Really terrific exercise there as well. So that is most of the scapula part of things. That's your shoulder girdle for the most part, in the upper back. Any questions on that, guys? Any question about your upper back muscles? Seems like we're feeling okay. All righty.
I think my scapula on the left, it hurts so bad. It's been like 3 days.
What do you mean your scapula hurts? Like, where's the pain?
I mean, it's on my shoulder, like
Here?
on the back side. Yes.
Or do you mean like literally back here?
Pretty much my left shoulder all the way back, which, I mean, does that make sense?
All the way back is very hard for me to understand.
Not all the way back, like half, like, you know, like when you
no, what I mean is like I don't know, that has a lot of interpretation. So like when you say your scapula hurts, right, do you mean like your scapula, like your shoulder blade hurts, like back?
Yes, exactly, like right there.
Okay, yeah. So if that's the case, I would say you might have like a little bit of a rotator cuff problem. We'll get to that in once we get through. I think they're coming up after chest. Yeah. So we're gonna get into deltoids next, and then so we're gonna go chest, and then we're gonna go shoulders, and then we're gonna get into the rotator cuff, which is sort of like inner shoulder. But you know, basically, Marjan, try doing stuff like this.
Yeah, that's a lot. I saw it the other day in Instagram.
Yeah, you're gonna want so you're gonna want to like lots of stuff like that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Wall angels, I'd say, is another really big one. A wall angel. Snow angel.
Why that happen? Is it because you slept bad, or you
probably
slept
just rounding all day?
Okay.
Just living your life like this, you know. That's what we all do.
Yeah.
You know, phones, work, computer, you know, all that stuff. So you're gonna go from here, keep your elbows and wrist on the wall, and you're gonna raise the arms up and then bring them back down.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes we'll call those like stick 'em ups. I like wall angels though. It looks like a snow angel.
How many reps? Like
anywhere from 15 to 20, 2 to 3 sets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, let's take a look at the pecs. So looking at our chest muscles here, we've got our pectoralis major. That's sort of our main pectoral muscle. It's the one you're, you know, thinking of. And its job is it actually does a lot of things. It's kind of a really cool looking muscle, actually. If you look at the shape of it, Notice how these fibers up here, they start high and then they actually twist and go down low. And then these lower fibers here, they come down low, they twist and come up high. So it looks like bow tie pasta, you know? And it comes all the way out there and creates this twisting action. Though by doing that, it allows it not only to have a little bit more stability, but it also can use different fibers to do different things. So NASM is going to be a little simplistic here. They're really just going to talk about the pec in general, but you do have a little bit of a difference between what is called your clavicular head. That's the one near the clavicle up here. And then you have like your sternal head, which is like the bottom portion. And so there is a little bit of difference. There's a difference between like a bench press, which really is focused on the chest and as a whole. And then you've got like an incline chest press, which is a little bit more of that clavicular head. So if you have trouble filling in the top of your chest, you probably need to do more incline chest press. If you have trouble filling in the bottom of your chest, you want to do more decline. There is some debate as to whether the bottom portion of the chest can be filled out with things like dips or decline bench presses and things like that. I personally am not a firm believer in like the bottom portion fibers firing separately. I really think it kind of comes down to just upper and middle fibers. But it's out there. So who knows, maybe somebody smarter than me has seen that and looked at that activation there. But personally, I think just separate it into two. But if we're looking at it, here's all of its jobs, right? It accelerates shoulder flexions. That's kind of a weird one, right? It's actually in charge of like shoulder flexion. So this kind of action here, which does not look like a push-up or a bench press or anything like that, but it actually does assist in that. Your upper fibers are going to contract to pull your arm into shoulder flexion. But what it's probably more famous for is the horizontal adduction. It is in charge of the fly, or if you look at this, right, even if I go here with a straight arm, right, that's the exact same thing as a push-up or a bench press, right? My elbow happens to be bending at the same time, but that's the horizontal adduction we're talking about, right? And then the other thing that it does is it does shoulder internal rotation. So again, Marjan, we were talking about like you need a little more external rotation, probably. I would have to, take a look actually.
Yeah.
Chances are that's what's happening. That's probably a little bit of tightness in here. So we want to stretch out that pectoralis major. Yeah, it's very common. Pectoralis major and pectoralis minor, very, 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 very tight.
Common.
On pretty much everybody, because we're all just sitting around like this all day,
And what you said, the rotation, it's gonna help the
external rotation is going to help.
external rotation. Yeah.
But you also need to loosen it up first, right? So we're going to loosen this up by, just like any other muscle, we're going to look at the integrative function, right? We're going to do the opposite, right? If this is in charge of shoulder flexion, I'm going to stretch it by doing shoulder extension. Although this is not a very great chest stretch. You'll sometimes see people do this one, and it feels pretty good, but it's not super effective most of the time. So we look at sort of the main job here. It does horizontal adduction. Well, then we need to do horizontal abduction. So
Okay.
we're going to go here and we're going to stretch that arm back. This is sometimes called like a pectoral wall stretch. So you'll see people do this version here, where basically your arm just gets trapped, you go up like this. You can do something called like a doorway stretch. You want to do both sides simultaneously. You walk through the door, your arms get stuck, and you just pull straight back. And that's abduction, because you're going away, right? And that's a really good one there. So you can do the straight arm version. You can do elevation, which is actually, I like that way better. You can do this version here. Now, all of those are really good. You can also do like in the corner, like this. I don't love this stretch. I think it's just very weird to go in the corner. It looks like the Blair Witch Project, but that is like a stretch you can do. All of those are going to be pectoral stretches. Okay, so that's definitely one we want to be familiar with. Another really good one is for your pectoralis minor. And this, remember, this is the one that protracts the scapula. So look at the difference between where these bones are inserting, guys, right? See how this one's running from the sternum over to the humerus? That's why it moves our humerus, right? But this muscle starts on the ribs and it grabs the scapula. It does not ever grab our humerus. So your pec minor doesn't do any of this part. It does this part. So when you see somebody on a bench press and they go like this, that's where you're getting your pec minor at the end, right? Which you can see leaves us rounded afterwards. So this is another one we absolutely want to stretch. So here's the other thing about it though, because it grabs the top, remember it does that downward rotation. We want more of that upward rotation. So one of the ways that you can stretch this muscle that it isn't really described here in the text, it's kind of hard to tell, is do a little bit of upward rotation. So while I said that you can do your pectoral stretch like this and you pull straight back, I like that stretch. You want to get your pec minor at the same time and get more bang for your buck, just take your arm 6 inches higher. And that right there is my favorite pectoral stretch. So Marjan, that's your homework.
Okay.
Right here. So she's doing a good job. Her elbow is about 6 inches above like where it would normally just come directly out. I'd say she could go even a little bit higher. There is that one too, right? Remember, this is right. That's the
Oh yeah.
shoulder extension. Give me that darn. Somebody get. There we go. This guy will work. I mean, I usually try to give you guys like pictures of people doing it, but there we go. Right. Just take your arm higher. It not all the way up here, obviously, but just slight elevation. I always say it's 6 inches above your shoulder. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. And that will get into that pec minor there, right in here. So pec major, pec minor, stretch both of those out, guys. Do your reverse, and then strengthen the antagonists, right? Do your reverse flies, do your external rotations, do your wall angels. Now let's go ahead and look at the shoulders here. We are going to have our shoulders are kind of fun. There's 3 deltoid muscles. So there's 3 separate caps to this muscle. You've got the anterior fibers, you've got the medial fibers, and you've got the posterior fibers. This could also be another thing that you want to strengthen, Marjan, is your posterior delt. But if we're looking at it, right, anterior fibers, that's in charge of shoulder flexion, right? It's in the front. So it literally just grabs here, pulls like that, arm goes straight up. So shoulder flexion, and then it does shoulder internal rotation. So we know that we have a lot of that internal rotation. Again, that anterior deltoid often needs to be stretched. So this is another one where, again, actually doing that stretch where you kind of go downwards like this and pull away can also be really effective. So anterior deltoid, definitely a big one on our overactive list. However, it's also a muscle that does make the shoulder look kind of nice. So a lot of times bodybuilders, I know a lot of guys are trying to build this muscle up. Really, anybody's trying to build this muscle up. So like if you're doing that, front raises are a really good one, or plate raises. I like plate raises personally because it puts you into external rotation. But you can do it with dumbbells as well. Just keep your thumbs up. Or just your classic military press. Right? Literally pressing overhead, overhead shoulder press, barbell military press, you know, any of those shoulder pressing exercises are going to be very good for the anterior delt because it's shoulder flexion, right? Medial deltoid, this is shoulder abduction. So that's also a military press action, right? You're getting plenty of that on the side of the deltoid there. Anytime where you are raising your arm up. So lateral raise is a really good one. Military press is a really good one. Dumbbell shoulder press is a really good one. Probably my favorite shoulder exercise that I think is very functional while also working on the muscles that, you know, round out the shoulder and look kind of good, is called scaption. Scaption is sort of the difference between it's not a front raise like this, and it's not a lateral raise like this. It's halfway between the two. So it's at sort of a 45-degree angle, and then it's also thumbs up. So I love this exercise because it's very functional. It's a great way to build up your shoulder while also putting you in an advantageous position. And it's a really good way. And oftentimes this guy's doing a great job, actually. It's a really good one to do while you're tucked up against a wall to limit any of that excessive extra movement. And that little 45-degree angle there is just going to be a really good way to ensure that your shoulder stays in a really good position and you work both the anterior and medial fibers simultaneously. So just like that, sort of in the angle. And then we got our posterior deltoid, a muscle we certainly want to strengthen. Remember, this one is sort of working against those pectoral muscles, you know. This one accelerates shoulder extension, so it goes this way. And it does shoulder external rotation. Actually, that's not this. External rotation, which is this, right? So it rotates the shoulder out. It also, and I'm not really seeing too much of it, it assists a little bit in horizontal abduction. So it does do this here, which is why the reverse fly, you know, where you're just kind of hinging at the waist, pulling here, is such a good example. I will say if you are going to do a reverse fly, though, give it a slight backwards angle. Go ever so slightly behind you at an angle like this rather than this. And that's going to help you ensure that you're getting a little bit of low trap work in there as well, which, you know, we love that lower trapezius. So those are the three heads of your deltoid, right? You got the anterior, medial, and posterior. Then we've also got our teres major here. Now this muscle is very interesting. I got to pull up a picture for this one separately. Okay, so teres major. That's a great freaking picture right there, actually. Pay attention to where this is originating. Oh, hold on. You can see this originates down here on the bottom portion of the scapula, runs towards the front of the body, and grabs the front of the humerus. So it runs almost like this, right? Like through the armpit and around to grab like the front of the arm. Obviously, that's not where it grabs, but it kind of does that, right? It goes through and grabs the front, which is why when it pulls, it does internal shoulder rotation. This is another one of our bad guy tight muscles. Okay. This is a muscle that is just so, I would say probably everybody in this room has a tight teres major in some capacity. It accelerates shoulder internal rotation. It does do a little bit of shoulder adduction as well. So it does do a little bit of this, and it does do a little bit of shoulder extension as well. But the big thing that it does that's screwing us up is that shoulder internal rotation, right? The rounding. It's not just scapular protraction. It's also the shoulder coming forward, right? I'll keep my shoulders retracted here, right? My scapular, my shoulders are retracted, but I'll just round my shoulders, right? And there's the protraction. So definitely the teres major being very overactive on a lot of our lists. We need more external rotation. And that's why the teres major is on our overactive list. And then we're going to see all of these muscles right here, which is our rotator cuff, on the underactive list. So working on the rotator cuff here, right? First one we're going to see is the teres minor. So it's very similar to the teres major. Teres major is going to grab the front, so it rotates the bone inward, right? Let's take a look at the teres minor. It grabs the back, so it pulls the bone into external rotation. So these are antagonists, right? One, if you picture them both kind of starting in the same place, because they kind of do. I mean, this one starts a little bit low, but you know, they start like this. One's grabbing the front, one's grabbing the back, and so they rotate like that. And that's what's, you know, rotating your arm backwards and forwards, right? So this muscle is weak we need more external rotation. This is why we like combo number 2 so much, right? So I would do a row, which would be horizontal abduction as well as scapular protraction. Then I would do an external rotation, which is the teres minor. Press, unpress, unrotate, unrow. That's a really good movement. It's a great shoulder warm up. Or you think about doing like a face pull, right? You get the cable machine, you grab the rope, right? Pull it towards your face, right? That's external rotation there. So that's that teres minor that we are working on, right? Shoulder external rotation. Definitely a muscle we want to strengthen, probably first on the list. Then we got our infraspinatus. This one also does shoulder external rotation. So again, same thing. When you're working your teres minor, you're working your infraspinatus. They're going to work together. So you don't really have much of a choice there. The garbage guy just absolutely dumped trash all over our front yard. That is so annoying. Then we got our subscapularis. This accelerates shoulder internal rotation. So this one actually is an internal rotator. But again, and I keep talking about how we have too much internal rotation. This is one that we actually do oftentimes see is tight sometimes, but like weak in other times, right? Sometimes this muscle is being inhibited by the teres major, you know, like it's doing all the internal rotation, so this muscle can't work. But if you do need to work on that, because maybe you have like a rotator cuff problem, you would do like cable internal and external rotations. So literally just like grabbing a cable machine, you know, resistance would be over here to my left. I would grab it with my right hand and I would do external rotations. That's a really great exercise. But let's say, you know, maybe I tore my whole rotator cuff and I need to get that back. Well, I can also start with the resistance over to my right and pull internal as well, right? That's also going to be a really good one. So it just depends on what you're working on. If you are doing the internal rotator version, just make sure you're keeping your scapula in retractions, that you have proper posture while you're doing it. Then we've also got our supraspinatus, right? Supraspinatus is going to accelerate abduction. So this is that muscle that gets impinged from the beginning of our lesson today, right? This muscle lives on top. It's called supra for superior, spinatus for being superior to the spine. Obviously, this is our spine, but it's the spine of the scapula. This little ridge right here. So if you look at the supraspinatus muscle, can hubby get one by itself? No. It lives right here. So it's above the spine and it grabs over the top. So there, again, you can kind of see, there's your teres major, there's your teres minor, subscapularis, right? So all of that's kind of coming together there to control the rotation of your humerus, right? And that's why that's your rotator cuff. That supraspinatus is the one that gets pinched between these structures right up here. So if this gets really tight and you start like elevating your collarbone, that tilts the whole scapula this way, right? Or tilts it forward, right? This bone eventually ends up pinching between the muscle here, right? Your collarbone, all this just ends up like resulting in that shoulder impingement. Just to pull up a different picture for you guys to see. So that pinching action there, which, you know, if you get pain right here, that's what we're talking about, right? This pinching action, that grinding that you'll sometimes feel when you're moving your shoulder through a full range of motion. That's definitely the calf, not the arm. All right, that's the scapula, guys. That's the shoulder stuff. That's your chest and back and shoulders. Any questions? It's a big section so far.
No, we're good.
Feeling good? You guys ready for arm day? All right, let's talk about the arms here. So a little bit of a shorter list. I mean, look at this. We only got a couple more to go. And guys, you'll almost be done. We only got one lesson after this. So the next one we got is the biceps, your biceps brachii. So these are sort of, there's going to be more muscles to your biceps than you think. But if you look at the biceps, if I just Google that, we're just going to see a lot of pictures of, oh, look at this. That's so dumb. Right, we see a lot of pictures like this. But if you actually look, you can see there are different fibers there. So there are different parts to your biceps. The main one is going to be your biceps brachii. Okay. And so bi stands for two. That's because there are two sets of fibers here, right? So its job is to concentrically accelerate elbow flexion, but you'll notice it is grabbing on the ulna right there. And then some of the fibers are grabbing on the radius. So some of those fibers go up here and some of them go up and they still go to the same spot, but they have to run over the arm first, right? And there's some fascia that's there to kind of hold it in place so it doesn't slide off. But the whole thing kind of runs up like this. So that's why it's your biceps. Very similar arrangement to what we see in our hamstring, actually, with those two sets of fibers, which is why we have our biceps femoris. It's because it's the biceps of your femur, whereas this is your sort of traditional biceps. Now, you'll notice because some of these fibers are going to go this way and some of them are going to go this way, they're going to control pronation. I'm sorry, they're going to control supination of the arm as well. So your bicep is, yes, it is in charge of elbow flexion, but it is also in charge of supination. If you look, you can actually see your bicep will contract just by flipping your palm over. So that's why I really like, when I'm trying to work on my biceps brachii, a neutral to supinated grip, because that gives me both actions simultaneously. Or I'll even go pronated into full supination there when I'm doing my curls, if that's the part of the arm I'm trying to work on, rather than just like a hammer curl, which I like, but like a hammer curl just keeps you in supination the entire time. This also does a little bit of shoulder flexion, weirdly enough. It actually can kind of assist in that shoulder flexion ever so slightly, but don't give it too much credit. So that is your biceps brachii. Flipping to the exact opposite side, you've also got your triceps brachii. This is going to do shoulder extension, or elbow extension, right? So if one does shoulder flexion, this one does elbow extension. So when you are pressing straight down, just like this. Now I will say this is another one where NASM is being a little reductive. There are two heads here, right? I mean, well, there's three heads. It's your triceps, right? You've got the upper and lower fibers there. So there's sort of two different ways to work this. There is this version where you're going straight down, doing tricep extensions like that. And then there's this version where you go at an angle like this. And those are going to work sort of different heads. If you want to get the upper portion of your triceps, you actually want to make sure you're a little bit in shoulder flexion first. So doing like an overhead tricep extension or a skull crusher is going to get those upper heads. And if you're trying to build more down towards your elbow, you're going to do, keep your shoulders in extension and then press down. Same thing is true of your biceps, by the way, right? If you go here, that's going to work a little bit differently than if you have your arms down here. So those are sort of the main ones, right? The bis and tris. And then we do have another bicep muscle. We have your brachioradialis here. Now this one's actually running from here around to the outside of your radius. So again, remember your ulna is this main sort of bladey part, right? If you karate chop something, right, this side, your radius is this side, right? So the the brachioradialis starts on the humerus and actually runs down, becomes a forearm muscle. So this is doing a little bit of shoulder flexion, I gotta stop saying shoulder flexion, elbow flexion as well. That's the one you work during a hammer curl. So if you do want to do like a hammer curl, you're going to get a little bit more action in that brachioradialis. I will say, if you ever get like, tennis elbow, the hammer curl is to be avoided at all costs, because that is actually the muscle that's rubbing on that tennis elbow side. So you got to work on that. And then lastly, we've got our brachialis, which just does elbow flexion. Now that one's living there. That's sort of the lower portion there, and it runs down and attaches to the radius instead of attaching to the ulna. That one works a lot better when you are in shoulder extension, actually. And so can't really do this because I don't have a declining thing. But if you want to work your brachialis, sit at an incline and let your arms. Here we go, I'll do this. Let your arms drop like this and do your curls from back here. So like get on an incline bench and do incline bicep curls. That's a really good one. Or drag curls, where you keep the bar really close to your body and you pull the elbow back like that. That's a really good way to get your brachialis. So if you are trying to build up your arms, those are sort of the 4 key places to do it. You know, you want one version of a tricep exercise pressing straight down. You want one that kind of goes overhead. You want one that just kind of curls straight up, and you want one that kind of curls at an angle. If you do that, it's a pretty good way to build up your arms. Now we got one last muscle our last couple muscles we're gonna see here. These are going to come back tomorrow for neck day. So I didn't necessarily put these in the notes, even though they are in the PowerPoint. So the first one's going to be your levator scapulae, or your levator scapula. This is a very interesting one. It lives here on the scapula and runs up and grabs the neck. What does it do? It elevates the scapula. Levator scapulae, right? So it does a little bit of that. That is why we have to talk about it in terms of the scapula. It also does a little bit of downward rotation. So by pulling up like this, it's, you know, the rest of the scapula kind of drops down. So it does that like downward rotation. This muscle, very, 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 very tight, very overactive in most of our clients. So that's another one that we want to work on. This and the upper trapezius, you know, they live right next to each other, both very tight muscles. We spin all day like this, right? So again, we need to stretch that one out. We do upper traps by going sideways. We do levator scapula by going slightly down. But we'll see that more tomorrow. And then the sternocleidomastoid, my favorite muscle in the body because it's just such a ridiculous name. Sterno because it's attached to your sternum, cleido for the clavicle, and mastoid because it goes right up to your mastoid process behind your, well, I guess below your ear. And so below. Postero-inferior to your ear. But that is the sternocleidomastoid there. And that one is what pulls our head forward. So we'll see those muscles tomorrow, but we do mention them a lot of times because they are associated with a lot of our shoulder dysfunction. So looking at our movements here, looking at these specific joint actions, we've got scapular protraction and scapular retraction. Protraction is rounding the shoulders forward, retraction is bringing them back. We've got scapular upward rotation, which is actually swinging the scapula this way, and we've got scapular downward rotation, which is swinging it this way. We have got scapular elevation and scapular depression. Then, oh, that's right. I like how this PowerPoint goes, actually. So for scapular, I'm going to skip down. I'll come back to the movements in a second. So skipping down. Oh, no, I don't have to skip down. Never mind. So what muscle is in charge of scapular protraction, the rounding, right? That's going to be mainly your pectoralis minor, which is the tight muscle, and the serratus anterior, which should be doing more work, but unfortunately kind of isn't. So this is the one we want to strengthen. That's the serratus anterior, and our pectoralis minor is the one we oftentimes want to loosen. But those are our scapular protractors. Scapular retractors, which we definitely want to strengthen, are going to be our middle trapezius. And I will say, if it were me, I would also put lower trapezius on here. But NASM, again, they do things a little bit differently than how I would. So there's the middle trapezius, and then rhomboids. Rhomboids are huge, right? So just pulling those shoulders back. We got scapular upward rotation, which, you know, we need a little bit more of in our lives. That's going to be your middle trapezius. Again, that's scapular retraction, as well as your lower trapezius, that's scapular depression, and the serratus anterior. So scapular protraction, but on purpose, right? Very distinct, working this bottom fibers down here. The Manny Pacquiao muscle, you know. Then we got scapular downward rotation. That's going to be your pec minor, right? Swinging that scapula downward, which we don't like. And then it says rhomboids here. That drives me crazy. It is the rhomboids, but particularly it's just these upper fibers right here. It's your rhomboids minor. It's these little tiny ones. It's not the whole rhomboid. So like, honestly, I just want to delete that so you guys don't think of the rhomboids as a bad guy muscle. Work on those rhomboids. Trust me, strengthen them. Just make sure you're not pulling like this when you do your rows. Okay. Keep your shoulders depressed while you're doing your rows, and you're going to strengthen the correct portion of your rhomboids. We got scapular elevation, right? That's obviously the levator scapula I talked about at the very end there. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. But that's an elevator, right? The upper trapezius, we'll also talk about that a lot tomorrow, right? That's going to elevate the shoulder. And then those freaking rhomboid minors, yes, they're on the list. But again, if it were me, I would just forget about the rhomboids. The rhomboids are a good guy muscle. We want to work those, but they are sort of on this list of a movement that we do a little bit too much of. Scapular depression. Oof. Sorry about the yellow, guys. That is going to be the lower trapezius, these fibers down here. And the pectoralis minor actually does do a little bit of that. So scapular depression, that is pushing down like this, right? So again, those scapular pull-ups is a good way to do it. But if you also do like body weight dips, that can also be a good way to get that scapular depression if you happen to need it. You know, that can work your lower traps just a little bit. However, bodyweight dips are extremely hard on the shoulder. So if you do not have proper posture or proper alignment, if you have any kind of grinding in your shoulder at all, I do not recommend dips in any capacity. But if you got full mobility and no grinding, great, go for it. You know, love it. So then we've got our shoulder abduction as well as shoulder adduction. We have got shoulder flexion versus shoulder extension. We've got horizontal adduction and horizontal abduction, horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction. We've got external rotation and internal rotation. So what muscles are in charge of abduction? Well, that's the medial deltoid and a little bit of that supraspinatus, as well as a little bit of your upper pec major fibers, just a little bit. Honestly, don't give the pectoralis credit for this. Then we got shoulder adduction, that big muscle, that's gonna be your lats, just mainly that lat muscle, right? A little bit of the teres major there, kind of assists in this as well. And a little bit of the lower fibers of your pec major. Like I said, some people consider the lower portion of your pec to be its own muscle. This is what we're seeing there. But if you've ever done pull-ups and you felt like your pec a little sore the next day, that's usually those lower fibers there. Shoulder that's shoulder adduction. Oh, I totally skipped forward. Sorry, that's shoulder adduction. We've also got shoulder abduction. That's going to be your medial deltoid, right? Supraspinatus. And like I said, that's the pec major. Oh, no, I had it right. I'm sorry. I scrolled the wrong direction. I got so confused there. Adduction is the lats, abduction is the deltoid. Then we've got internal rotation. That's rotating this way, right? So rotating inward. Your lat does that as well, right? Remember, your lat also internally rotates the arm. But the really big bad guy here is probably going to be that teres major. That teres major swinging the arm inwards, rounding our shoulders forward. A little bit of the subscapularis, a little bit of the pec major there as well. But honestly, teres major is the big guy. So again, we're working on that external rotation as much as we can. In terms of external rotation, what muscles are in charge of that? It's your rotator cuff, right? Mostly the infraspinatus and teres minor, but also your posterior deltoid. So that, anything where we're swinging those arms, swinging them open. Then we've got our horizontal abduction. That's the reverse fly. Again, we're going to see posterior deltoid is sort of the king of that. A little bit of medial deltoid there as well. Infraspinatus and teres minor. So the same muscles that work your external rotation also work your horizontal abduction. Again, this is why we like reverse flies so much. That is just a very great exercise. Then we're going to see horizontal adduction, pec major, bench press, push-ups, chest press, chest fly. Right, all of those are pec major. A little bit of anterior deltoid works there as well. That's why you see that listed on the machines sometimes when you go in there. We got our elbow flexion, we got our elbow extension, and we've got elbow pronation and elbow supination. So the flexion, biceps brachii, brachialis, and brachioradialis, right? Those are all in charge of that elbow flexion. Meanwhile, your tricep is working in extension. There is also this little tiny muscle that they got listed here, your anconeus. This is like the little pectineus in your knee. Or I'm sorry, not pectineus. Hold on. I'm forgetting the name of that freaking muscle. Oh, what is that freaking thing called? Oh, I can't remember the name of it. I have to pull it up. We never talk about it. Oh, it's this little tiny one. Anyway, it's basically the anconeus of the knee. But yeah, this little tiny like stabilizer there that we never mention. It's this like little short itty bitty muscle. But that's your elbow extension. And then you've got your pronation. That's going to be your brachioradialis. That's the one that pulls down like this. And then your supination, that's your biceps brachii and brachioradialis. So they are the ones that do that. And that is everything. We also have all the wrist stuff. Now the wrist stuff is in the PowerPoint, but like I said, wrist stuff, we don't talk about it. It's not really our area, but I did want to just show you the movements. You've got wrist flexion and wrist extension, adduction and abduction as well. And then there's a couple little like carpal muscles that are going to control that. That's why these are in yellow. It's all the stuff that we basically aren't supposed to teach you, but if we wanted to teach you, we could. But it is literally, would have like a whole day's worth of muscles because there are just like, I think 20 or 30 muscles just in the wrist alone. But that's it, guys. That is all of the muscles that are going to kind of control the shoulder and the arm. It was a really big list today, but you guys nailed it. Sticking with me as long as you're all still awake. Any questions or comments today, guys? Anybody worried about anything?
Good, sir.
All righty. So guys, make sure you pop over to Canvas today. You will see it is day 4 or day 4. It's day 10. So that's going to be homework number 4 today. So you can see that right here. Go in there, knock it out. It's all going to be questions about the shoulders and questions about the pelvic girdle. So I'd say homework 4 is probably my favorite piece of homework in this class, just in terms of importance. So study it, practice it over and over and over again. And you get that homework done and you're going to have a pretty good understanding of what muscles are controlling what. And that is about it. I can let you all out of here.